It's time now for Harm Reduction, heard every Tuesday at 7 p.m. with Will Beaton, Cutting Edge Radio, where we'll ask the questions others don't want to ask. Now here's your host, Will Beaton.
Hello everybody, it's Willard TeaBelly. This is the Harm Reduction Report, and we are coming at you live. I am reporting from good old G-Funk, North Dakota. But this is our last episode with this sort of California perspectives theme that we've been riffing on for the last few weeks. I'm happy to end our California segments series with this episode in particular, because what you're going to be hearing is a bunch of audio that I recorded from the Women's Visionary Council's Risk Reduction Workshop held in Nevada City, California, a few weeks ago. So, the Women's Visionary Council is this non-profit group out there who hired me to come out and film their workshop. And so, what's risk reduction? Well, it's basically the same thing as harm reduction, different sorts of phrases to emphasize different aspects of what that is. The Women's Visionary Council likes to call it risk reduction. And so what is that really? It's, the same thing we've talked about on our show, which is overdose prevention and reducing stigma associated with this stuff, not to celebrate it in any cheap commercial way, but to just bring real awareness and information out there for people whose lives are on the line. And so I'm really excited. I was thrilled to get to spend all day with these speakers, recording them and asking them questions and watching them interact with the public and whatnot that was coming in. So right now I'll describe the four speakers that you're going to hear, and about the 56-minute mark I'll cut in again and remind you that the episode is ending for those of you listening on the radio. If you continue listening after I interrupt, you'll hear the second half of the very last fourth speaker. So here's the speakers. Who are they and what are they talking about? What is this workshop all about? Well, we open with Ethan Currens. He is a materials scientist. He works in a lab, and he's really fun and cool and entertaining. And he's talking about weighing and measuring. So you may not think that's so important, like weighing and measuring substances. But, this is part of the reason why people misdose each other and misdose themselves. If you don't know how to use a milligram scale properly, or you don't know how to dilute your dose properly, you may overdose yourself big time. So Ethan will be explaining how to use a milligram scale, how to do volumetric measuring, which means putting your substance into liquid and dosing it that way with a little milliliter syringe, sort of. So that's highly entertaining and fun. The next person you'll hear is Amy Raves, who runs this group, an outreach activism sort of group called Safer Raving. And what she talks about is she calls it drug checking kits, substance testing. We've talked about this on the show before too, where you buy these cheap little reagent liquids from Dance Safe or others online, like $20, this little vial of liquid shows up at your door, and you say you think you have some MDMA, that's Molly, some ecstasy, but you want to make sure it actually is that and not just a bunch of amphetamine mixed in with some caffeine, mixed in with something else, maybe even fentanyl, which will kill you. So you use this reagent, you drop a couple drops, one little drop of liquid onto a tiny little piece of your powder, and it'll change color, and it can detect the presence of certain chemicals. So Amy Raves will be explaining how to use these drug checking kits, these substance testing kits. Very helpful information. Next, it's getting more serious as we go down the line here, in my opinion. Next speaker is Emanuel Sferios. He's talking about fentanyl test strips. So you can run, say, your MDMA through the drug checking kits, and they may indeed indicate, yes, there is MDMA in your pill. But there still could be other things in your pill that you don't know. And the big important thing that you don't want in your pill is fentanyl, because it's an opioid that's very powerful and you can misdose and die on it very easily. So the fentanyl test strip, it's like a pregnancy test, sort of. You dump it in your drugs, basically, and it'll change a certain color if it detects any fentanyl, on top of whatever else you've done with your drug checking. So that's fun. And finally, we'll cut to Dr. Gantt Galloway, who runs the New Leaf Treatment Center in the Bay Area, California. And he's talking about how to respond to an actual opioid overdose. He explains what an overdose is, how to use naloxone, how to give rescue breaths, and call for an ambulance. And his excellent talk at the end of this section. So, 20 seconds here, we're going to cut to the audio. You're going to hear Ethan, Amy, Emanuel, and Gantt talking. These are their truncated sequences from the risk reduction workshop that I filmed at last week. So I'll cut in again about the 56-minute mark. This is the Harm Reduction Report, last California Perspectives episode. Thank you, everybody, and as always, sandbag on.
My name is Ethan Currens. I'm a materials engineer in my day job, and I was trained partially as a chemist. I want to make weighing and measuring of substances accessible to everyone. So everything that I'm going to be showing today and doing today, everything can be purchased for less than the cost of a dinner out at a restaurant. Everything on this table, everything you need to measure whatever recreational chemical you're doing. It's actually really fascinating because alcohol we dose in the tens of grams. Phenibut and GHB we dose in the single gram sort of dosing level. MDMA and methadone, that sort of class, we dose in the hundreds of milligrams. The 2C series, we dose in the tens of milligrams. Substituted tryptamines, substituted amphetamines, we dose in the single milligrams. Well, some of the more potent hallucinogens are the hundreds of micrograms, and then fentanyl and LSD are bioactive in the tens of micrograms range. That is a range of 7 orders of magnitude, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. 7 orders of magnitude is sort of the difference between, like, let's say a chihuahua and a continent. So actually, I brought substances in this full range for people to look at. I've chosen standard laboratory substances. So this is potassium chloride. Okay, here's a full bag of 10 grams of potassium chloride, all the way down to 1 milligram of potassium chloride, which ends up being a couple grains, like a couple grains of sand or sugar or salt, and you can barely even see it. And this is calcium oxide, and this calcium oxide is very finely powdered. So when we go ahead and place these side by side, what we'll find is that they look very, very different. And what I'm trying to show here is that when people go ahead and eyeball a dose, when they put their finger in a bag, it's almost impossible to judge how much chemical they're actually getting. 1 milligram of potassium chloride in sort of crystal form, you can barely see. Meanwhile, 1 milligram of the calcium oxide that's been very finely powdered looks like it partially fills the bag. Right? There's no way to miss that amount of powder. So that can be true of whatever recreational chemical someone might be doing. Is depending on how finely powdered it is, what color it is, these things, it's almost impossible to judge a dose using eyes. I would recommend very strongly against trying to weigh or measure anything under a milligram, because even with laboratory scales in a laboratory setting, under 1 milligram is an amount of powder that will stick to anything with static. It's just, don't attempt it. I would leave it to the professionals. When I started my sort of career in science about 15 years ago, if you wanted to own a milligram scale, you were going to pay hundreds of dollars for it, a large thing to sit on a desk that was very difficult to keep in calibration. Nowadays, anyone can get a milligram scale on Amazon, on any online vendor website for $20, which is incredibly powerful and incredibly useful. However, just because you have a scale doesn't mean you're using it properly. You see I have my scale in the package it came from. I just like to leave my scale in here because it was made for this scale. It has everything sort of cut out for it, and so this is a nice way to take good care of it. So the way that these scales work is that they're very sensitive. However, they are not very accurate at the very lower end of their range. So part of the reason that we have this dish is to actually put some weight on the scale and get it into the middle range of what it can weigh. So if you were trying to weigh 10 or 20 milligrams just on this little plate right here, it wouldn't be very accurate. So all of these scales come with these little calibration weights. Just sits inside of here. Pop on the calibration weight. Make sure your scale is working properly. I'm reading 10.002. So in theory, my scale is 2 milligrams off right now, which is really that's a pretty fantastic level of accuracy. These scales do not work well unless they are level. So if you are trying to measure things on a hillside, or frankly on any sort of angle whatsoever, you'll find that it is extremely inaccurate. Don't do it on your bed. Don't do it on like the hillside of an amphitheater. You want to try to find the flattest surface that you can. So this is kind of an extreme angle, but I want to see what this will do to it. So I've now placed a Sharpie under there, and we'll see what this will read. Yeah, okay, so now the calibration weight, instead of reading 10.002, is reading 9.86. This platter looks as if it is made for you to put powder on and pour powder directly off the platter. It has this nice little pouring spout, as if you were to put powder on the platter of the scale and pour it into something. That's not what you should do. The powders that we'll be dealing with will stick to anything. They'll stick via static, they'll stick via humidity. So we actually don't want to use this platter to pour powder off of. What we want to do is we want to use gelatin capsules. If I'm ever going to be doing any delicate work here with a scale or with capsules, I like to put on gloves. Not because I need the gloves to protect me from anything, but because as soon as I put on these gloves, I am immediately aware of my hands and what they're doing. Humans are naturally moist, naturally clammy, some of us more than others. So that these gelatin capsules like to absorb water in particular. That's why they work so well. It's because they quickly absorb water and then dissolve. So if you were to be weighing out substances in like the low milligram range, your wet fingerprints alone could be several milligrams and could give you a poor reading. So I just pulled out some party straws for a couple dollars online. So this costs nothing. And actually I think this is often the aha moment for people, where it really just clicks on, sort of the light bulb in their head goes on, which is that all you need to do is go ahead and snip this straw like that, and snip it at an angle, and you now have the perfect implement for taking substances out of a bag and loading it into a capsule. Because this angled straw will fit into any size capsule you're using, and this straw it's just perfect. It's the perfect tool. I mean, frankly, a paper straw would be better than nothing. Would be better than trying to, I don't even know how you do it without a straw. Or people use a key sometimes to pull powder out of a bag. You might notice that I have a colorful variety of, just very happy, wonderful, shiny, glittery capsules right here. And this isn't just because I'm a colorful, shiny, glittery person and like these things in my life. This itself is actually a risk reduction tactic. We have this variety of colors in capsules so that you can fill one color of capsule with one particular substance at one particular dosage, and that if then these capsules are distributed, people know exactly what's inside, where if you were putting different chemicals at different dosages inside the same color capsule, as soon as you hand it to someone, as soon as this capsule is out of your hands, nobody knows what's inside it anymore. Just try to make this as inebriation proof as possible. Let's call this technique. These gelatin capsules just cost almost nothing. I purchased them from Amazon. There's also a great website, Capsule USA, that I'm not associated with. I'm not advertising for them. But they have many colors of capsules that you can buy 1,000 at a time for approximately $6. So all of the capsules that you see here sitting on this table, all of these colors, this probably costs $15 in total. And they're adorable, they're beautiful. Who doesn't want shiny, glittery capsules going into their body? Traditional wisdom says that you should use the tare function on a scale. So I've now put the capsule on. I can see that it weighs almost exactly 100 milligrams. And then you would hit tare, and the scale resets at 0. So now you can pull the capsule off and then proceed to measure. And what I will tell you is that using tare is actually the wrong way to weigh out substances. And I'll show you why. because now this scale is tiered at 100 milligrams for the weight of this capsule, and I am going to start weighing this substance out into the capsule. What's going to happen after about 30 seconds is that this scale is going to turn off. And when the scale turns off, you actually lose the tare. So you lose the record of what the capsule that you're loading into actually weighs. It would be great if these scales would stay on for a minute or two at a time, but they don't. And there you go. So the scale just turned off. And even with my skilled hands, with the bag and the capsule ready, I didn't have time to fill the capsule before the scale turned off. Luckily, I looked at the weight of the capsule when I put it on, and I saw the weight of the capsule was 100 milligrams. So that makes it really easy to put in another 100 milligrams. I know that the scale and the substance, or sorry, the capsule and the substance should weigh a total of 200 milligrams. These gelatin capsules are really convenient in that you can fit them together without locking them. So right now the capsule has been sort of placed together, but it just slides in and out, you can see. So let's go ahead and put this on. I put in way too much substance. I put in 260 milligrams. So I just dumped some out. And now we're at 211. You also don't want to be doing this in wind, because if you're trying to weigh very fine amounts of substances in the wind, you're just going to be, your scale is going to be blowing around, and the measurement's going to be flying all over the place. So if you are in a festival, in like sort of the camping environment, do it inside your tent, not outside your tent, and try to get as flat a surface as possible. So I'm going to pour just a little bit out, see if we can hit 100 milligrams on the nose. Let's see, not quite. Okay, so we're at 108. So I'm going to call that good. Now this capsule is prepared, I'm going to lock it. And the way I lock it is you just press. And I just pressed it closed. And now this capsule, it won't just come open. It won't just slide in and out. It's locked closed. You can still open the capsule. If you grip it tightly and sort of rotate it, you can pull the halves apart. But this way, the capsule will not fall apart. So this capsule now contains 108 milligrams of potassium chloride, and it's not going to fall apart in my bag. And I'm ready to go. So I'm just taking a Sharpie, a little plastic bag. Again, these little plastic bags, you can get 1,000 of them, purchase them on Amazon, purchase them online for a few dollars. They cost nothing. The cost is just nothing at all. So 108 milligrams potassium chloride. I'm just gonna go ahead and put it in the bag. And with this nice, this bag has a nice white stripe on it that sort of holds Sharpie ink better for longer periods of time. No one is going to mistake this. These scales are great, but again, they will often be plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4 milligrams. The difference between, let's say, a 19 milligram experience and a 15 milligram experience would be quite significant for a lot of people. How do we get around that? And the answer is volumetric measurements. If we want, say, a 20 milligram dose of 2CB for 5 people, if we measure out 100 milligrams plus or minus 4, and then just divide that by the 5 doses that we want, we're going to take that error and cut it by the amount of doses that we've just made. Doing this is a really powerful way to remove that error from your measurements. So I am going to show you how to make a solution from this in a way that's easy to deal with. And I only like to deal with powers of 10 because powers of 10 are really easy. So in this case, I'm going to take this 108 milligrams of potassium chloride and make a solution as if it was a potent substance like 2CB. These disposable 1 milliliter syringes come from, again, Amazon, come from online. These syringes cost, there's 100 in this box. I think this box costs $6. They just cost nothing at all. They are listed as disposable, like one-time use. You can certainly use these over and over and over again. You can see the syringe is 1 milliliter. It actually has down to 1/100th of a milliliter marks on here. I wouldn't trust it to 1/100th of a milliliter. We're not going to be dealing with amounts of water that small, or amounts of solvent. I'm going to put this 108 milligrams, or now a little bit less because I spilled some, 108 milligrams of potassium chloride into a 10 milliliter solution. So here is the bottle that I'm going to use. That's 2. That's 3. That's 9. That's 10. So there's now 10 milliliters of water in here, and we are going to open our capsule up and just go ahead and dump in the 100 milligrams of chemical. So how many milligrams per milliliter is that? 10 milliliters, 100 milligrams. It's very simple. We have 10 milligrams per milliliter. Powers of 10, make it nice and easy. The very first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna color it. Just put in a drop of food coloring, because the last thing that we want is for somebody to think that this is water, because it is not water. It is water with some drug involved. So now, this solution is now very brightly colored, and nobody will mistake it for water. Maybe Kool-Aid, but someone will think twice before they just go ahead and put this in their body. Right now, not in 10 minutes, not in half an hour, not before I leave for the event that I'm going to, but right now, I'm going to write the concentration of this solution on the bottle in Sharpie. 10 milligrams per milliliter of potassium chloride, KCl. Unmistakable. And what I'm going to do actually to even make this more permanent is, now that I've written this on the bottle, I'm just going to put some packing tape over the label. So now that label is absolutely never going to come off. No matter how much you rub this bottle, this is labeled. So this can never be mistaken as something. You'll never lose track of the concentration. This is just a Sharpie, packing tape. Any sort of, you can use a mason jar, any sort of small bottle works. A water bottle works if you label it and color the solution. So I think almost everyone has heard stories of having a liquid solution of some potent chemical and having it be way higher of a dose than they expected. And in many cases, that is because the carrier, the actual solvent, has evaporated out and concentrated the solution. If you think about it, if alcohol is evaporating out through the threads of this, say we happen to leave it open for a couple hours, this solution is going to reduce by half. So suddenly our solution is twice as potent. Propylene glycol is available at any pharmacy, again available Amazon for a few dollars. It costs next to nothing. Propylene glycol, it tastes kind of a little bit sweet and it's very thick. The advantage of propylene glycol is that it does not evaporate. It will not concentrate. Even water, we would consider a volatile solvent for this, because even water will evaporate over time. I would advocate as much as possible for using the power of the scale and using the power of gelatin capsules to pre-make, to pre-weigh substances. So this is infrastructure that it's really, really easy, really cheap, over the counter. Anyone can own these. No problem at all. It's easy, it's fun, it's science, but with things that you put in your body.
Hi everyone, my name's Amy Raves. I'm a harm reductionista, or a risk reductionista. That means I provide risk reduction services to the dance and nightlife community. I set up booths at raves and festivals. I do what DanceSafe does. I promote peer-based drug education. I talk to people about their drug use and safe drug use. And I provide reagent drug checking with DanceSafe drug checking kits. I do that because I got tired of hearing about people dying in the rave scene and the festival scene because they didn't know what they were taking, and it hit kind of close to home for me. So in 2013, I founded a risk reduction harm reduction organization called Safer Raving by yours truly, Amy Raves. And so today I'll be performing a demonstration on how to properly and safely use these DanceSafe drug checking kits. Someone needs to care about you, and that's where harm and risk reduction operations step in. These drug checking kits, the first one ever made was the Marquis reagent, which is good for detecting the presence of MDMA or MDA in a pill. It doesn't tell you how much of a substance is in a pill, It doesn't tell you everything that's contained in a pill, but it tells you whether your ecstasy pill contains MDMA or not. And that's a really good place to start. Sadly, in today's market, we have a lot of counterfeit drugs. And these counterfeit drugs, especially in my focus in the dance and nightlife community, the primary drug there is ecstasy or MDMA. And things like PMA, paramethamphetamine, are being misrepresented as ecstasy. And nobody wants an ecstasy pill with PMA because it kills people. With these drug checking kits, you can at least detect the presence of certain substances. And I've brought some things to test here today. I honestly don't know what they are. But I have very small amounts, and you guys should probably move a little closer. I encourage you to come a little closer. So even though I have such a small amount, it doesn't take much for a reagent to react. So I'm going to try and dump half of this little bit of substance out into this one dish. And there I've got just a little bit, if you can see just how little that is. It really doesn't take much to identify a substance. Nothing really came out of that one.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, a little bit. Okay, that was a really small amount.
That's all you need there.
You can see really how small an amount that is in that dish. And that's how sensitive these drug checking reagents are. This one looks like it's in a chunk form. So I'm going to kind of crunch that up with the capsule if I can. That worked. And move a little bit over into the other side of the dish. Into there. And that'll be enough. With these dance-safe drug checking kits comes a chart. And this chart lists about 20 different substances that can be revealed with these different reagents. However, online you can find hundreds of different substances that will react to any of these various reagents. I want to use gloves because reagents are very corrosive. They're made with things like sulfuric acid that will eat through your skin and burn you. They will also eat through surfaces. So it's really important that you use a non-porous surface to test your substances on, and we recommend a porcelain plate. You can use a regular dinner plate. So I got this little dish that's excellent because I can put multiple samples into it and keep them organized and neat. The first reagent I'm going to use is called Marquis. And the Marquis reagent was, again, the first one that was used for drug checking at festivals. I'm going to drop one drop on this. That's all it takes is one drop. I'm going to make sure that when I drop it, that I keep it a good enough distance above the substance. I don't want to reach down and actually touch the substance because I can contaminate my reagent. And we don't want to do that. Keep it about an inch above the substance. And I'm going to drop one small, teeny drop. Now what I can tell you is that it is not in the MD family. It's not MDMA, it's not MDE, it's not MDMA. So we've got a substance that's no reaction. So far we know that this could possibly be mephedrone, alpha PVP, any of these. It could be PMA or PMMA. It could be ketamine, and that's not a bad suspect. And it could also be cocaine. Now I've got to narrow down between cocaine and probably ketamine is what I'm thinking. Okay, this mandolin reagent is yellow, and it has a little residue in the bottom. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of shake to make sure that it's properly mixed. And again, I'm going to apply one drop to this at a distance far enough that backsplash can't happen and I can't contaminate my reagent. I'm rechecking the same one that we tested already that had no reaction. Okay, so one drop from high up. Boop. Okay, whoa, we went from yellow to, what is it, like reddish, orangish, reddish? Okay, where's our, let's take a look at our...
Here, and cocaine.
Yep.
Here.
Ketamine goes from orangish to like a brownish. Cocaine goes from orange to yellow. So we're still in an orange place here.
Yeah.
So we're going to wait a little while for more reaction to occur. And we're going to see if this continues to darken. And actually, it's not relightening back to a yellow, is it? It went from orange, and it just seems to keep getting darker.
Although it is different colors in different parts of the well.
Right.
But maybe that's just the reagent.
That is the color, the original color of the reagent. That was the color when it hit the dish. It goes to from white to the lightest yellow you could imagine.
Cocaine with Lieberman goes to a fairly light yellow also.
Oh, it does.
More of a
It does. I think we've just put ourselves out of the Lieberman category.
Yeah.
Yeah, because both change yellow.
So why is that? Why? So say cocaine and ketamine are fairly similarly used, and
Yes.
you're trying to test to see which is which, and you don't want to test by putting them up your nose. Why are these colors so similar?
There's a pretty positive identification that this is, in fact, ketamine because it hasn't gone back to yellow. It's remaining orangish and then to a brownish, and it's more towards the brownish now, and I think we've got a pretty good match with that brown to this brown, and it's still brown, and it still hasn't gone to yellow. So I'm going to say positively identified as ketamine. So we're going to test the next substance. I'm hoping we have some MDMA here, because MDMA's reaction is really cool. It goes to the prettiest, deepest purple you'd ever see. And then it goes to black. And sometimes you can get a little puff of smoke from the reaction. And I like that part. It's above, high enough up that I won't contaminate my bottle of reagent. And there goes that. Oh, sizzle, 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 purple. Oh, purple.
And getting darker.
And getting darker and darker, purple to black. And now, okay, so now what we know right now is that this substance is one of these. How do we differentiate between MDMA and MDA? Well, if you look here, the Simon's reagent will turn to blue for MDMA and MDE. And for MDA, there's no reaction. So we can tell the difference between SAS and Molly. And so we're going to use a Simon's reagent. Simon's reagent is especially cool. I think it's one of my favorite reagents because of two things. One, it's a two-step reagent. It's two separate chemicals. And if you'll notice here, Simon's B. And there's still another bottle in here. And you don't have a Simon's reaction or a Simon's reagent without the both of these together. So first I'm going to apply 1 drop of Simon A, sample of MD, we don't know. So 1 drop from a good distance up. That's a little bigger than I'm trying to get. So I'm going to withdraw that and give a shake. No, it doesn't want to let go. Okay, big drop it is. Apply the second drop of Simon B, and what we should see is either no reaction or it should turn to blue. Hopefully this is MDMA, because if it is, it'll turn the most beautiful blue I've ever seen. And it's called Simon Blue, and that's the actual name of the color. So watch this. And here goes drop number 2. Ooh, look how pretty. Look how pretty that color is. How beautiful is that? That color is not that, right?
Wide world of sports.
Yeah, and I think I want to paint something Simon Blue someday. So we've positively identified ketamine today and MDMA. Okay, just because our Marquis and Simon reagent revealed to us that MDMA is present in our pill does not necessarily mean that that's the only substance that's in it. We've seen PMA, or paramethoxyamphetamine, is added to a pill. Actually, the pill is primarily PMA, and the chemist will add a teeny bit of MDMA into it, just enough to trick the reagents to give a positive reaction, yet it can still contain a deadly dose of PMA. PMA has a 2-hour come up. It takes 2 hours for it for you to start to feel it. So if you take a pill and an hour and 20 minutes later, you're like, hey, I don't feel anything. These are weak pills. Let me take another one. You've just taken a fatal dose of PMA. So I'm going to put 1 drop Again, holding the bottle an inch above so we don't contaminate our substance. Marquee turned yellow-green. What could that be, yellow-green? Holy cow, is this 2CB? Just to be sure, I think I want to try the Meccy.
How do we know it's not 2CI? It's really similar. In fact, there may even be...
I didn't see any blue in there. There's some blue in there, and it's supposed to turn blue for the 2CI. And it's staying dark green, and some of it's staying yellow. So we've got both colors represented in this sample. Then it'll turn from yellow to brown. So we're going to go ahead and put 1 drop of the Meccy on this, and we're going to see what happens. Yellow to brown. We've got MDMA and we've got 2CB. Okay, we have an Ehrlich's reagent. The Ehrlich reagent is used to identify LSD. So it works on indoles. Okay, so DMT, psilocybin, psilocin, 5-MeO-DMT, 5-MeO-MIPT. No reaction with N-bombs.
That's the key.
Yeah, that is the key. So all the indoles will turn purple. And let's see what we've got here. Ehrlich reagent can also take time. It can take up to a minute or two.
Does anybody have any questions for the amazing Amy Raves?
The Rave Act is really the Illicit Drug Anti-Proliferation Act of 2003. Drugs are not allowed here. Do not bring drugs in here. Do not talk about drugs in here. We do not allow drugs in here. If I'm there saying, hey, come test your drugs, then the venue and the promoter is providing and promoting a place where drugs are used. And that's why the mother of a young girl who passed away, this poor girl died, Shelley Goldsmith. She died after taking MDMA because she didn't have access to water, and the temperature in the club was about 100 degrees, maybe a few degrees above 100 degrees. MDMA limits your body's thermoregulation system. It limits your body's ability to regulate temperature. So when you start to overheat, your body can't work against that by cooling you down. Shelley Goldsmith died that way, and her mom, when she learned about why her daughter really died, because of the venue conditions and the prohibition of honest, fact-based drug education and drug checking services, so she went on a campaign to amend the Rave Act. We can safely go to the bathroom and wash it down the sink without leaving any residue that a cleaner might come and get on their fingers. Now, before we wrap this up, everybody, does anybody see any purplish hue to this well in here? Does anybody see any purplish hue? I hold it up in the light a little, this one right here.
No.
So being extremely careful to start slowly with your dosing. It's really important that if you don't have good information about the substance that you're taking besides reagent results, you don't have the testimony of your friends who have taken the same exact substance that they acquired from the same exact person in and about around the same time, you should probably start really slow. A little sizzle, sizzle, poof, smoke, purple, black. And it's all it's fun. Because chemistry is cool.
I'm Emanuel Sferios, and I founded Gantt 20 years ago now. Gantt is a harm and risk reduction nonprofit serving psychedelic and party drug users in the nightlife community. The thing about the BTNX strips is that they actually contain 2 antibodies. These are immunoassay technology strips similar to pregnancy testing. They actually create an artificial antibody that gets activated in the presence of the drug that we're looking for. And there are forensic and urine test strips for a variety of what they call drugs of abuse, right? Which is a term I don't particularly like myself. But so these strips have been around for law enforcement and for treatment facilities who want to test urine of their clients for a long time. We did a study to assess their effectiveness as harm reduction tools. These contain both antibodies for fentanyl and carfentanil, which thus make them able to detect the majority of fentanyl-related analogs that are out there right now. We tested 5 strips marketed by 3 different companies and discovered varying levels of effectiveness. One of the company's strips didn't work at all. The BTNX strips, they're a Canadian company, and they're the only strips that were able to detect all the fentanyl analogs and almost all of the carfentanil analogs. The most important thing to know about fentanyls is that they are never distributed evenly within a baggie of powder or even within a counterfeit pharmaceutical pill. Fentanyl is showing up in a variety of drugs, but mostly we're seeing it mixed with heroin or sold as Xanax or as Norcos by legal manufacturers making and pressing fake pharmaceuticals. So even within a pressed tablet, you don't know whether or not the fentanyl is evenly mixed. We call it the chocolate chip cookie effect. So you have to test everything you intend to consume before you consume it. And I'm going to show today how to test both injected drugs and non-injected drugs. Injected drugs are actually easier to test. So if we're ready, they're individually wrapped. I'll open one right now. And inside is the strip. This is what it looks like. And the antibodies are in there. You dip it in the liquid and it travels up and it activates red lines in this section here. And 1 red line is positive, 2 red lines is negative for the presence of fentanyl. It's got to be remembered that you need to test everything you intend to consume. You can't just take a little bit of the powder in your baggie and test that, because that might not contain any fentanyl. It might be concentrated somewhere else, and even shaking the baggie isn't going to evenly distribute it. Fentanyl is active at such a small amount. For injected drugs, you test your cooker, the residue in your cooker, your spoon or whatever aluminum cooker you use. We don't have with us a cooker or a metal spoon, so I just brought a plastic spoon, which obviously you can't apply heat to, but we'll just pretend that that's the spoon that you have mixed your heroin in. You would mix your drugs in your spoon as you normally do, draw it up. Of course, you'll be using cotton and following all of the harm reduction protocols for using injected drugs. And then you would have a spoon. There's a little drop in there I couldn't get out, but let's just, you got all of your syringe ready. You set it aside, and now we're going to test the residue that's on the spoon. So then you would get a clean syringe or a clean spoon, and you would refill your spoon with clean water. Through capillary action, the water will travel up the strip, and so we'll see it happen right now. Of course, this is just clean water, so we're going to get a negative result. It takes about 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. There, now you can sort of see the water traveling up the test area, and once it gets to the top, water itself will activate the top strip no matter what. That's the the top line. That's the control line. If there is no fentanyl in the sample, it will also activate the lower red line. So as you can see, both red lines are starting to form now, which indicates that there is no fentanyl or fentanyl analog present in this water. If there is fentanyl in there, then you will not see that line. So we say 1 line positive, 2 lines negative. This was the end that we dipped into the sample. Unfortunately, we've seen fentanyl in not only counterfeit pharmaceuticals, but also in cocaine, and maybe even some other party drugs. We don't know whether this is terrorism or intentional murder. Kind of doesn't make sense to put fentanyl into cocaine because people using stimulants are not looking for an opiate high. But nonetheless, there's been at least 30 deaths around the country that we know of in the last year from cocaine-tainted with fentanyl. I have an aspirin here, but let's say you got on the dark net and you purchased 100 Norcos or Xanax pills, right? And you want to make sure there's no fentanyl in them. So you have to test everything that you intend to consume. You can't just scrape a tiny bit of the powder because of the chocolate chip cookie effect. So you will need to crush up and dissolve the entire pill. There we go. Crushing up your pill. And I have here a full half cup of water, thereabouts. The important thing to know is you make it really dilute. You want, it's fine and better because you really want every crystal in there to be dissolved. So half a cup of water for your single dose. Brush all this in or rinse your plate off because there might be the fentanyl in here. You got to get it all in. This is what I'm saying, right? A carfentanil is fatal at the microgram level, and so you want to make sure you test everything. If you can't get it all in, you just wash that plate off. Don't start licking the plate. And then you have to dissolve it. Let's see if aspirin dissolves in water pretty well. Actually, it looks like it is dissolving fairly well. Warmer water will dissolve faster. This is not dissolving completely, but you would stir and use warm water to make sure it was completely dissolved first. We'll see if aspirin produces a false positive right now. So you dip the strip in, and again we will see the water move up into the test area soon. 2 lines is negative, 1 line is positive, and I can start to see both lines appearing. And this was the one we did about 5 minutes ago. You see the lines have gotten brighter. So you probably want to wait a few minutes at least before you officially determine that lower line. But it's pretty clear already that the lower line's appearing. No fentanyl in this aspirin. Well, now, unfortunately, you'll have to consume it by drinking the water. Like some drugs, you're not going to want to do that with. For example, if you buy an 8-ball of cocaine and you want to make sure there's no fentanyl in it, and people like to snort their cocaine, not drink it, you're not going to want to, do 20 tests and then try to rehydrate every line that you do. It's impossible. So you're going to want to test the entire 8-ball and rehydrate it. So, then you would need a bigger jar of water to really dilute it. And unfortunately, you'll have to wait a day or two before you can turn that into powder again. The general method for doing that is to pour the liquid onto a Pyrex plate. In dry climates, it might take 48 hours. In Florida or humid climates, you might need to put it in your oven on low and just make sure it doesn't burn. But eventually, the water will evaporate away, and you'll be left with powder that you can scrape off of the glass Pyrex. Again, unfortunately, that's the way you would have to do it. You can't just test a little bit of the powder from your 8-ball because of the chocolate chip cookie effect. We did find that MDMA, pure MDMA, produced a false positive with the strips at concentrations of 25 milligrams per milliliter or higher concentration, meaning you have to dilute your sample enough not to get a false positive with MDMA. And 25 milligrams per milliliter is a very concentrated amount. So it would be like, putting your dose in a spoon and just covering it with water, right? That's way too concentrated. This is why we say half a cup. Just put your dose in a half a cup of water and test that. Just make sure you dilute your sample enough, and I'll hold it up. A whole half a cup of water for a single dose is not going to be too dilute. People sometimes think, I don't want to dilute it too much, but there's virtually no way you can over dilute it. Probably 5 cups of water would work too, but half a cup is enough to make sure you don't have a false positive. But you'll pick up any fentanyls that are in there.
Hi, I'm Gantt Galloway. I run the New Leaf Recovery Foundation. We do risk reduction work, And one of the things we do is distribute naloxone to treat opioid overdoses. There's a lot of attention on opioids these days. A lot of people have problems with opioids, addiction and overdoses, but there's addiction to all sorts of substances. And a lot of what applies for addiction treatment in general applies to all substances. And to some extent, I get asked what the worst addiction is, what the worst substance is, and my answer to that is the worst thing is the one that gotcha. We now have over 40,000 people a year dying of opioid overdoses in 2018. Opioid overdoses are simple to treat, and I'm going to explain how that's treated, demonstrate kits. These kits are fairly widely available, and they're different forms. We distribute these in bags, and what's in the kits: 2 syringes and 2 ampules of this medication called naloxone. Used to be sold under the brand name Narcan, so you may hear both terms used, and I may go back and forth a bit using both terms. We'll also include a card signed by our authorizing physician, Dr. Alex Stallcup. This will demonstrate that one has been trained in use of this medication. If your vial of Narcan is expired, we will happily replace it. Just contact us. However, I can't advise you to use expired Narcan, but modern medications, what happens when they expire is that they become less potent. They're not becoming toxic in any medication that we know of, certainly not Narcan. They lose potency. Sometimes these expiration dates are conservative. Expiration dates are designed to kick in the worst case scenario when the medication drops below 95% potency. The U.S. Armed Forces have done testing on naloxone and found that it lasts 7 years beyond its expiration date. If it expires, we'll replace it. Opioid overdose, it can be a slow downward spiral. There can be hours in which one can evaluate and intervene in this. Naloxone is a very effective medication for treatment of opioid overdose. It is extremely safe. So if somebody comes in the emergency department and you're not sure what's going on, it might be opioid overdose, you're concerned that they're on the brink of death, you have no hesitation about giving naloxone. It's not going to hurt somebody in terms of risking their life. Naloxone is highly effective. Pretty much everybody who gets naloxone who's having an opioid overdose survives. It's in the high 90% range. The one possible downside to giving naloxone is if one gives too much and somebody is tissue dependent on opioids and one goes beyond just reversing the overdose and getting them breathing again, it is possible that it will make them feel sick and have withdrawal symptoms. Withdrawal symptoms from opioids are generally not life-threatening, so this is just a discomfort issue. There is also this nasal formulation. I'll open it up and show you that this is a single-use, don't test it out, but it just gets held. It gets held like this, put up the nostril of the person who's overdosing, push up on that, and a single dose is administered up the nostril. And ordinarily that should be enough to overcome an overdose. These are a little more expensive. These are too expensive for us to distribute in bulk, but for people who have insurance, if they can get a prescription written, there is also an auto-injector that is slick and easy to use and doesn't require pulling the medication up into syringes that I'm going to demonstrate, but that has become extremely expensive, and that's basically unaffordable at present.
Hey everybody, this is Willard TeaBelly again, cutting into the audio here from the Women's Visionary Council's Risk Reduction Workshop in Nevada City, California that I recorded a few weeks ago. Hope you've been enjoying the speakers. So you heard Ethan Currens talking about weighing and measuring. You heard Amy Raves talking about drug checking. You heard Emanuel Sferios talking about fentanyl test strips. And you heard Dr. Gantt Galloway just now explaining what to do in the case of an opioid response. Actually, he's about to get to the good part. He's got this acronym called SCARE ME, and he'll go through it. Every step is like what to do if someone is overdosing. It's very helpful, very interesting, and also kind of a funny... I mean, it's like... we talked about scare tactics growing up. Like, people are usually trying to... growing up in Grand Forks, the education I got about these things was scare tactics. So I think, saying just don't ever go near any of these substances, they'll all kill you, period. So I think it's kind of funny that his... The training, and he'll explain, it's from something called the DOPE Project. This harm reduction group in Oakland, California, made this training. And I'm curious about their choice of acronym, SCARE ME. It kind of is hearkening back to those scare tactics things. So obviously it's not scare tactics at all. It's really good information. Dr. Gantt Galloway will get right into that now. If you keep listening online on the Sandbagger News YouTube channel, or maybe you'll see the link on the UND Psychedelic Club Facebook page. If you're listening on KEQQ Radio and G-Funk 88.3 FM right now, or on KEQQ.com, you unfortunately are going to have to go online to see the rest of Dr. Galloway's interview, because our time here on the air is running short. We've only got a minute left. So I hope you'll check it out. But thank you again to everybody who put this workshop together. I am going to be... So this is all video, right? I just pulled the audio out for the radio show this week here. Soon, the video will be finished, and I would love to share it with you all. And it'll include all these 4 people. So I'll be sure to post... I'll mention it when it's finished and we've shared the video. So if anybody wants to see what these people look like, you'll be able to watch this all again and share with your friends and share with your kids and everything. Tell them good information, I think. Okay, now we've got a minute left. I want to make one more pitch here for our friend at the city in the public health department. There are these harm reduction kits. Basically, they include a sharps container for a sharp needle, a used syringe. They can contain naloxone, which Galloway here has been talking about. They contain condoms and also some other harm reduction stuff, useful things for anybody who is a syringe using drug user, basically. If you know of anybody who uses syringes to inject substances, we're trying to get rid of these kits that are just useful for people who might be in that situation. So if you know anybody who could benefit from a kit, please reach out to us at the Harm Reduction Report, and we'll see about getting you to their friends. Thank you all so much. This is the Harm Reduction Report. Willard TeaBelly here, signing out. Sandbag on.
We owe our training to the DOPE Project in Oakland, California. And they are pros at this. So SCARE ME. The first is S for stimulation. You don't know if somebody is overdose, unconscious, asleep, rousable, or not. So you want to establish this first before you go through more serious steps. So you try to stimulate somebody. If you know their name, hey, George, Jane, are you awake? Wake up. You can say, I'm going to Narcan you. I'm going to give you naloxone. If somebody has had opioid addiction and has gotten naloxone before and has gotten a little too much and had some bad reaction to it, some uncomfortable reaction to it, not dangerous, but uncomfortable, they may wake up. If you can't rouse them that way, a way to stimulate them to cause pain without causing damage is to rub your knuckle on their breastbone, a sternal rub, and that hurts, but it doesn't damage people. If they're still not responding, then the most important things to do are to call 911. It is not necessary to say, this person is overdosed. You, in fact, don't know you can never know for sure what's going on. You can have a good idea, you can have a very high index of suspicion, but something else may have happened. Even if you saw somebody use drugs 5 minutes ago, it's still possible something else has happened in the meantime. Just call 911. Person is unconscious, not responsive, having trouble breathing, not breathing, whatever you tell them, just give them the facts as you are sure of in those respects. The third is airway. You check and make sure that their airway is clear. So you make sure that they are lying down, flat on their back. You can do a chin lift and head tilt back, and if the airway is straighter, it's easier to breathe. If somebody is CPR trained, you will have learned all this in CPR. So I do recommend that. If you think you might need to use naloxone, getting trained in CPR is a fine thing as well, because that will give you some of the steps you need. One possible reaction to naloxone is that people will vomit. It's uncommon to have adverse reactions to naloxone. Precipitated withdrawal can include waking up, being irritable, vomiting. These are uncommon reactions, but if somebody vomits, you do want to turn them on their side so they're not breathing the vomit back in. See if they're breathing. If it's not obvious whether they're breathing enough, you can put your ear to listen for breathing. You can look at the chest to see if it's rising and falling. If they're not, then you can open the mouth, look and see if there's anything. If you see anything in the mouth, just scoop it out. See if that takes care of the problem. If they're still not breathing, and if they're not, when I say not breathing, that means not breathing fast enough. If they're non-responsive and they're not breathing at least once every 5 seconds, then you want to do some rescue breaths. Again, pinch the nose, blow into the mouth, a normal breath. Hopefully you'll see the chest rising and falling if the airway is open. If you don't have naloxone, calling 911 and doing rescue breathing is great. Naloxone is really just kind of icing on the cake. But if you're breathing for somebody, they need to breathe. Whether you're doing it for them or whether you give naloxone as an antidote and they start breathing on their own, either one is okay. Don't leave them if they're not breathing. But if you have to leave to get help, it's possible they'll vomit. Put them in this recovery position. You roll them on their side. When you have this material, look closer. Put the legs and arms and head as indicated. But this means if they vomit, it will go out of their mouth and they won't be breathing it in. So opioids have a variety of effects, different parts of the body. There are obviously some euphoric aspects to their effects, cough suppression, slowing down the gut, so they're useful for treating diarrhea. Conversely, they induce constipation. One unfortunate additional effect, though, is that they suppress breathing centers in the brain, and this is the mechanism by which they kill you. Opioids alone can do this. Opioids in combination with other medications that also suppress breathing are more dangerous. So those other medications could include alcohol, the class of drugs known as benzodiazepines, which is Valium, Xanax, Klonopin. So the respiration stops first, and then the heart falters and stops. The heart is still beating. Give the respirations, get oxygen back in the system, and that will keep the heart beating. The naloxone works really well. It gets on the same receptors that the opioids do. It basically bumps them off. And then once the opioids are not on the receptors, they're not working anymore, they're no longer suppressing the respiration. This naloxone works only for opioids. Other sorts of overdoses will not be made worse by naloxone, but will not be treated by naloxone. This is part of why it's important to call 911 regardless, because you don't know. It's an opioid-only overdose. Naloxone is a relatively short-acting drug. There are some long-acting opioids. Usually if you give somebody naloxone and they wake up, they come back, they're doing fine, they are going to be fine, but there are some opioids that are long-lasting. The naloxone may wear off. There is the possibility that somebody will get back into trouble and even die after you think you've taken care of the problem. Now, naloxone does not work immediately. It may take minutes to circulate through the bloodstream, get to the brain, get the opioid off the receptors. It's a question of balance, of how much of the opioid is suppressing your respiration versus how much naloxone are you given. The next letter in our Scare Me acronym is E. You evaluate. Are they doing better? Sometimes you get them with a better position for the airway. You make sure that their mouth is clear. You give them a few rescue breaths. They will improve. But if they haven't, you then need to evaluate for yourself, do I have naloxone nearby? Can I prepare it? You don't want to, if it's, down the hall, around the corner, in the back of a closet, and it's going to take you minutes to get it and bring it back and prepare it, you just want to keep doing rescue breathing. If you have it in the immediate vicinity, you can go grab the kit, bring it back, give a couple more rescue breaths, and then prepare the medication. The M in Scare Me, you give a muscular injection. It needs to go in the thigh, not the eye. Ideally it goes in a muscle or a vein. You don't want to take the time to try and put it in a vein, but if it goes in a vein by mistake, you don't need to draw back on the syringe and make sure you're not in a blood vessel. If it goes in a blood vessel, not a big deal. Well, this is a practice pad for injecting into. One opens it up. The Narcan comes in these little flip-top ampules. These are super easy to open. Pop, the top is off. Get that out of the way. Pull the needle cap off. If you're needing to give this medication, you may find your nerves a little bit jangled. You don't want to be having two moving objects at once. Just take the vial, put it down on a flat surface, put the needle into the vial. These needles are long enough. You just put it all the way to the bottom, draw up the naloxone. Simple, easy. Make sure you have it all up. It's just a jabbing motion all the way in, and then inject. Now, when I say muscle, you'll have somebody on their back so you can check their breathing, do some artificial respiration. The thigh is a large muscle, convenient to get to. And so this will just be jabbed into somebody's thigh. You're giving naloxone, it's an emergency situation. You don't worry about taking the clothing off. The needles are sharp. You don't worry about cleaning the skin. The risk of infection from any single injection is low. With some medications, you want to be careful about, are you sure it goes into the muscle rather than, for example, a vein? With naloxone, that really doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt somebody if it goes into a vein or artery instead of a muscle. Of course, in Pulp Fiction, the medication was injected directly into the heart. It was the wrong medication in the wrong place. Very traumatic, very good for the movies. Overdoses are not always as they appear to be in the movies, though. They're not always quick. The thigh is fine. Large muscle. Muscles have good blood supply. There's no reason to put it anywhere else, ever. It is important to consider once you're in the middle of this crisis situation that may have you on edge, to remember you have now a contaminated needle, a sharp, and you want to be sure not to hurt yourself. These are safety needles, so if one simply pushes like that, the needle is now covered, contained. So as soon as you give an injection, cover up the needle. This now cannot be gotten free again. As safe, you can put it down. You can get back to taking care of the person who's overdosed. After one administers the naloxone, you immediately go back to doing rescue breathing. Wait 3 to 5 minutes, which in the moment may seem like an eternity. If you're in a city, waiting several minutes, you are getting close to the time by which paramedics will be responding in most cities. But 3 to 5 minutes, they haven't responded, they're not breathing on their own again, you can give the second dose of naloxone. There are 2 doses in each kit. Typically, that's going to be enough. Again, if you are doing rescue breathing, if you have 911 on the way, you have done the important stuff. The last E in scare me is evaluation and support. Are they breathing on their own? You do keep in mind that it wears off in roughly an hour. So you don't want somebody wandering off. It's possible that somebody, even from these doses of naloxone, will have some discomfort. That discomfort is, they might call dope sick. They might call opioid withdrawal. Their reaction might be to want more opioids, and that is just the wrong thing for a couple of reasons, one of which is that the naloxone wears off after about an hour, and if they take more, they may be able to just overcome the naloxone you gave them. And it will also put them at greater risk once that hour or so is up that the naloxone works for. If the person wakes up and is feeling uncomfortable, just tell them what happened, reassure them. You weren't breathing, I gave you naloxone, it's not gonna last very long, you'll be okay, hang on, this is temporary. So just give them support. I've been in the uncomfortable situation before naloxone was widely available. For example, having a patient in my office who was nodding off and was breathing 3 times a minute. And that's not enough. And I could rouse her and I could get her breathing again, but I didn't have naloxone. I had to just call 911. It worked out, but it's reassuring to have this medication available. When you are in the moment and you need to give naloxone to somebody, you will have this Scare Me brochure, and you will also have this even handier reference card. 1, call 911. 2, do rescue breathing. And 3, give naloxone. Get this training now, review it again in the future. There is also a nice online training, getnaloxonenow.org. I highly recommend that as well. There is a Good Samaritan Act that if you call 911, you are supposed to be immune from prosecution for possession of drugs, not for sale quantities, being under the influence, or possession of paraphernalia. Law in California and many other states is supposed to protect you from being arrested. If you act with reasonable care, again, if you inject in the thigh, not the eye, and you give naloxone, you are immune from any sort of civil liability as well. You can't be sued. It does give me cause to reflect that we have had naloxone on the market as a treatment for opioid overdose in hospitals, for example, for many decades. We're just recently, as of 2018, getting it out in communities. It does make me wonder how many other risk reduction interventions we should be doing that we're missing. I would point out that for those who end up needing naloxone because they're addicted and they have had an overdose in the course of their addiction, that it is a little bit sort of after the horse has gotten out of the barn. There are effective treatments for opioid addiction available. They are grossly underutilized in this country and to a large extent unavailable. And these are medications like methadone and buprenorphine, which work really well. The best medication is the one that you give once. Has no side effects, complete cure rate, and only requires a single administration. There are such medications for some conditions, but there are a lot of medications that you do give on an ongoing basis, like insulin for diabetes. We would prefer better treatments for diabetes, but nobody says that diabetics should stop taking insulin. People who are opioid dependent may actually need to be on a treatment for opioid dependence, a medication treatment for opioid dependence for years on end. It does look like short-term use of those treatments is probably not helpful, may actually increase mortality in people. The treatments for opioid addiction that are given for short-term, those do need sustained use. Those are some of the most effective treatments we have in Western medicine. Methadone reduces death rates in opioid addicts 80% and makes their lives better in other ways as well. The concern has been raised that because Narcan is available, that people will feel safer about using opioids, be more inclined to use opioids, or even at the extreme sort of push the limits and know that they can be brought back. This harkens back to arguments used about distributing condoms to young people, and it's been shown that rather than promoting sexual activity, that distributing birth control delays sexual activity. This has also been raised as a concern with needle exchange, where one gives clean needles to people so there won't be HIV transmission. This seems to make people more receptive to treatment, to give people clean needles. One could also talk about seatbelts. Seatbelts make driving safer. Does this mean that people drive more recklessly? No, people don't want to get in auto accidents. People don't want to have overdoses. People who have the disease of addiction do have a different relationship with drugs. They continue to use despite adverse consequences, including the risk of overdose, and that is really the cardinal feature of the disease of addiction. But that doesn't mean they want to overdose. This is a mix of different sorts of opioids and different contexts of use. So certainly people who are addicted, who have irregular supplies of opioids, who are getting some that are stronger and weaker and they don't know, and maybe using other drugs sometimes but not all the time. This puts people at extra risk, and this is one of the highest risk groups of people. These are people who may be using prescription opioids not the way they're prescribed. This may be people who are using heroin. This may be people who think they're using heroin but are actually using a synthetic drug, fentanyl, or closely related compounds to fentanyl. These are also people who should probably have overdose treatment kits and whose friends and family should be aware of these kits and know how to use them. The person who has an overdose is not able at that point to use the kit. So it's really about the people around them knowing that the kit is there and knowing how to use it. There are some things that put one at additional risk of overdose. That could be if one has an illegal supply of opioids, one may not know what is in it. Somebody who has underlying medical problems, if you're asthmatic or have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and you use an inhaler, and it's been a while since you used your inhaler and you're going to need it in another hour and you're going to take opioids, don't be using opioids when you're going to be needing, additional support for your respiratory function. Likewise, somebody who's dehydrated, has a fever, is otherwise sick, is probably going to be at increased risk of dying from an opioid overdose.